All right. Today we're going to talk about a book that, for so many of us, is a huge part of growing up. Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. For decades, this was the book in schools for teaching right from wrong. But now, well, now it's right in the middle of a massive debate about whether it even belongs in the classroom anymore.
Yeah, you probably remember that line. It's like the moral heartbeat of the whole novel, right? A lesson in empathy taught through Scout Finch and her dad, Atticus, this lawyer defending a black man in the deeply segregated South. For a long, long time, this quote was seen as this powerful, unimpeachable statement against racism.
But here's the thing. The big question today is, does that lesson actually hold up? I mean, does this book really help us understand the fight for racial justice? Or could it, maybe without even meaning to, actually be getting in the way?
Okay, so to really get what's going on, we have to back up a little. Let's first talk about why this book became such an absolute giant of American culture to begin with.
I mean, you got to think about the timing. It comes out in 1960, right in the thick of the civil rights movement, and it just explodes. Wins a Pulitzer, and pretty soon it's basically required reading for generations of American students. For a lot of people, this book was their very first introduction to the idea of racial injustice.
But, you know, as our national conversation about race has gotten deeper and more complex, so has the way we look at this book. The novel that was once praised by almost everyone, well, now it's challenged all the time.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The source of the criticism has done a complete 180. For like 50 years, the pushback came mostly from conservatives. They were worried about the adult themes, the violence, and especially the use of the N-word. But today, the loudest critiques are coming from the left. And they're not just arguing about words. They're arguing that the book's whole framework for talking about racism is flawed.
All right, so let's dig into that. What is the actual case against Mockingbird? Why are people saying maybe it shouldn't be the centerpiece of the curriculum anymore?
Okay, a lot of the modern criticism really boils down to this one big idea, the white savior complex. The argument is that, when you get right down to it, the story isn't really about the black community's fight for justice. It's about the moral quest and, the heroism of a white man, Atticus Finch.
And when you look at it from that angle, you start to see the issues they're pointing to. The entire story is told through the eyes of a white kid, Scout. Tom Robinson, the man whose actual life is on the line, he's barely a character. He's more of a symbol, a passive victim with almost no voice or agency of his own. And that, critics say, leads to an even bigger problem. The book frames racism not as this huge, baked-in system, but as a personal flaw of a few bad individuals.
Right, and this quote from Lisa Lucas at the National Book Foundation really hits the nail on the head. She says, "One person can't change the judicial system. By focusing so much on one good man's fight, the novel completely sidesteps the reality of systemic racism. It takes this giant, complicated social structure and shrinks it down to a simple story about one guy's personal courage."
Okay, but that is just one side of a very complicated argument. There's also a really passionate defense for keeping this book in schools, and its supporters think it might be more relevant now than it's ever been.
You see, a lot of educators, like this teacher Steven Singer, will tell you, hey, those literary critiques, they're fair. They have a point. But they argue if you only focus on those flaws, you're missing the book's incredible power as a tool for teaching.
So, the argument from Mockingbird goes something like this. First, since racism was created and is upheld by white society, isn't exploring it through a white narrator's eyes a really direct way to get white students to confront it? And second, maybe Atticus isn't a savior so much as he's a model of moral responsibility. He does the right thing not to be a hero, but because it's his duty. Proponents also make it clear this book should be a starting point, not the be-all, end-all text on racism. And maybe the most important part of the defense, that uncomfortable feeling you get when reading it, that's the point. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable, because it forces you to face a brutal injustice head-on.
So where does that leave us with To Kill a Mockingbird? Is it a timeless lesson in justice, or is it a relic that we should, maybe put on a shelf?
It's possible the book's true relevance today isn't in giving us any easy answers about racism. Maybe its real value now lies in its incredible ability to force this exact conversation, this difficult, messy, but totally essential debate we're having about who tells our stories and what justice really looks like in America.
And that leaves us with one last huge question to think about. When we're looking at a classic piece of art, should we judge its value based on the impact it had when it was first created, or should we judge it by what it means in our world, right here, right now? There's no easy answer, and that tension is probably why this book is still so powerful and still so controversial all these years later.